Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the spiritual nature of water. And tonight we are going to split the class. And the first part will be about the connection of water to Yom Kippur. We've already done the connection of water to Elul. Last week we did the connection of water to Rosh Hashanah, and tonight Yom Kippur, and next week to Sukkot. So there are many connections, water, Yom Kippur, and as I mentioned, as we go through the holidays of Tishrei, even though we started already in Elul, the prominence of water gets stronger and stronger. Of course, Rosh Hashanah, last week, we discussed the amazing ritual called Tashlich, which is all about water. So let's look at what connections can we make between water and Yom Kippur. And there are many, and they're very important. The first one is close to a universal custom that many people, many men, depending on what stage of life, women, don't go to the mikveh that often. It's a Hasidic thing that men try to go before Shabbat and Yom Tov, but many men hardly ever go to the mikveh. And women, again, if they're not married and keeping the laws of family purity, are also not going to the mikveh. But there is a custom that Erev Yom Kippur and at night and the day, everyone goes to the mikveh. And this is like a huge thing. It's a huge thing, including kids who are under bar and bat mitzvah. Now, it might not be that every community does this, but it's a pretty widespread custom that usually the women go at night and the men go during the day. And usually the mikvaot are jammed. So this already tells us the nature of Yom Kippur is the idea of purity. It's very connected to purity. And we're going to see soon how that plays itself out. So that's the first connection to water that we can make is, like I said, many people don't go the entire year. Will go Erev Yom Kippur to the mikveh. And as I said, is this because the image of Yom Kippur is that we're being purified, we're being atoned for, forgiven, and purified. So since we mentioned that, I'll just go right to a verse that we say a number of times during the Yom Kippur service. And we also say it during Slichot. And that is the following. And this verse is so important because it represents the feeling of Yom Kippur. So it says, First, we speak to God, and then God is speaking to us through the prophet. So we say, Zrok aleinu mayim taharim v'taharenu. Pour over us pure waters and purify us. And where do we get? And then it says, Kamosh Katuv, like it says. Now that is our plea to God. Pour over us purifying waters. Where do we learn this from? From a verse. And this is God speaking to the prophet and says, V'zirakti aleichem mayim taharim v'tahartem. I will pour over you purifying waters, and you will be purified. Mikol tumotechem, from all of your impurity, umikol gilulechem, and from all of your uncleanliness. Spirit is really talking about spiritually. Ataher etchem, I will purify you. So this verse is repeated many times in Yom Kippur and also during Slichot, that there are different customs, but many people continue to say Slichot between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Not every community does that, but for those that do it, then we're reading these verses every day in Slichot as well. So that is another very, very important connection to water, the image of and the feeling of the day of God pouring over us, purifying waters and purifying us. Then we already mentioned how we go to the mikvah. The service of the Kohen Gadol in the temple at the time of the temple was really the crowning glory of the Kohen Gadol. And in a sense, it was called the avoda, the service. And all of our worship of God is called avoda. In fact, it says in Pirkei Avot, the whole world stands on three things: on Torah, avoda, and gemilut chasadim, on learning Torah, on the service of God, and deeds of loving kindness. But the pinnacle of service of God was performed by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Now we have to remember that at the time of, especially the first temple, and almost the entire time of the second temple, there were no synagogues, there were no Beit Knesset. The avoda of all of Israel was done every day in the temple for all of Israel. Only at the end of the second temple period did the concept of individual synagogues in various villages and cities take hold. But for hundreds of years, it was the service in the temple, and the service was the service of the Kohen Gadol. During Musaf of Yom Kippur, we follow the Kohen Gadol as he does the service. This is one of the greatest visualizations of the entire year, that we actually follow the Kohen Gadol and reenact everything he did on Yom Kippur. One of the things he did was he changed clothes many times between what are called the white vestments or garments. There were 4 white vestments, and then the 8, which were called the golden vestments, because they had gold in them. And in between, each time the Kohen Gadol would change his clothes for different parts of the service, he would go to the mikvah. And he went to the mikvah. It's in Musaf. He went to the mikvah 5 times during the service. That was actually a very important part of the service, is each time between, they call it a segment of the avoda, which entailed a different wearing of the garments, he would go to the mikvah. So again, this shows this not once, not twice, 5 times. 5 times. So this obviously was a very important part of the avoda. And again, it's the idea we go to the mikveh to purify ourselves, to nullify our will, to return to the womb, to be reborn. All of the meanings of the mikveh, which we will get to at the proper time in this series. Now, there's an interesting connection here, because mikvah, the root word can mean 2 things. Kuf, vav, he. Can mean a gathering of water, but it also means hope, optimism. And in fact, in the 27th Psalm that we say every single day, we say, Kaveh el Hashem, Chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kaveh el Hashem. Hope in God and strengthen your heart, and God will help you strengthen it, and hope in God. But it's the root of mikvah. And it's the root of the whole concept of purifying in water. So this is just a very important thing, because every day from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Hoshana Rabbah, or some people Simchat Torah, say this psalm twice a day. And it ends, hope in God. But the mikvah, the idea of being purified through water, represents this idea of hope. So Yom Kippur, along with being a day of atonement, a day of forgiveness, a day of purification, is also a day of hope. And the mikvah itself is connected. The feeling of going into a mikvah is the ability to get rid of our tuma, physically and spiritually, get rid of our impurity, and have an experience of rebirth and new hope. And we'll just end with the idea that at the fifth and concluding prayer of Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah. So we've already discussed in the month of Elul the importance of the 13 midot of Rachamim and the 13 aspects of compassion, characteristics of compassion. And we made the connection that Mem is the 13th letter. Mem is the letter of water. And that, again, is a visualization. The idea is that the 13 midot of Rachamim are very, very much like the 13 inner dimensions of the Sfirot, that they are the channels through which an infinite God pours like water, like a waterfall, his influx of energy into the finite worlds to create and to maintain the finite worlds. So the 13 midot of Rachamim are like 13 streams of water. So that we've mentioned already. So on Yom Kippur, so the first four prayers, we don't mention the 13 midot of Rachamim, but when it gets to Ne'ilah, we mention them over and over and over again. It becomes pretty much the central focus of the last prayer of Yom Kippur, is a 13 midot of Rachamim. And again, this is envisioned as a flow of purifying waters. So these are many of the different connections of water to Yom Kippur. And I'll just bless everyone that we could keep this in mind and really visualize, really focus this idea of being purified in a waterfall of God's light and compassion and purifying waters. Okay, now we are going to continue. We began last week, and we will probably be continuing this for this week and the next time that we meet. And this is different times that water is mentioned in the Chumash, 5 books of Moses, and then later in the 24 books of the Bible, the Tanakh. Most of our emphasis will be on the 5 books. Last week, we started with a discussion of the flood, and we will continue now. And I want to mention something I mentioned last week, is that each time that water is mentioned, it's part of a whole story, a whole episode, a whole event. And for our purposes, we're not going to go into every detail of the events. We're going to concentrate on the connection with water, because if we would expand it to the whole episode, so this mini series would become a maxi series, and I want to keep it somewhat focused on water. So the next mention of water is it's actually not even mentioned explicitly in the Torah, but it has an incredible importance. And that is why Avraham is called Avraham HaIvri, Avram the Hebrew. So what is the word for Hebrew? Ivri. What is the root of Ivri? Is ayin bet resh, which means to cross over, to go from one place to another place, to transpose oneself. So why is he called Avram HaIvri? So actually the simple meaning is, we know from the Chumash, Avram is born in what's called the East. Then the East was called anything east of the Euphrates River. We usually think nowadays of East as the Far East, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan. In the time of the Bible, the East was what we would call Assyria, Persia, Iran, India. That was what was called the East. So Avram on the map today came from Iraq, what would be called Iraq today. That was called the East, and he was born east of the Euphrates River. In the ancient world, the Euphrates River was one of the most important rivers. In fact, it's even mentioned as one of the 4 rivers that flowed out of Eden, is Nar Parat. So the Euphrates was a landmark. Just like today, we might think of crossing the ocean as being a landmark. You're either on one side of the ocean or the other. So in those days, to cross the Euphrates was a huge geographical crossing over from one world to another world. So the simple understanding why he's called Avram HaIvri is because he left the East on his way to Eretz Yisrael. He crossed over. He was over the Euphrates. Perhaps a deeper reason, but it's very connected to this, is the idea that with the Avram's teachings of monotheism and his reaching out to people and spreading the word of one God, so that placed him on one side of the world. And the Midrash says he crossed over like a line that no one had crossed over before. And he stood on one side of the world, and everyone else stood on the other side of the world. That's what the Midrash says. And that's a deeper understanding for Avram HaIvri. He crossed over a spiritual, psychological, mystical line that no one else had really crossed over in the way that he did. Now, what's interesting here is, if you look at the root of Ivri, it's ayin bet resh. If you look at his original name, Avram, or even Avraham, it's based on aleph bet resh. So it's very close. When you say Avraham HaIvri, linguistically, grammatically, it's very, very close. The difference is an aleph and an ayin. Now, when the Midrash says that Avram crossed over and stood on one side of the world. So he is the Aleph. And according to tradition, how many nations are there? There's 70 archetypal nations. That's the letter Ayin. So Avram Ha'ivri, in other words, he crossed over from being one of the 70 nations, and he became the unique nation of Israel. So truthfully, I could go on very much. And for those who already, and I'm very happy, who have purchased the book, one was Avram, can read about this. There's much more to this idea of Avram crossing over, but I want to connect it to water here, because Avram, he was an archetypal figure. This is one of the most important parts of the book, is understanding Avram as an archetypal figure, meaning everything that he did paved the way for the future, for Am Yisrael and the entire world. So again, without going into the individual events, which I will mention later, when Avram comes to Israel, so eventually he has to go down to Egypt, and he comes back. But just very quickly, when we come out of Egypt to go to freedom, we also had to cross a body of water. We crossed the Yam Suf, and then we were in the desert. And to get into Israel, we had to cross another river, the Jordan River. And later, like I said, I'm going to go back over all of these. Later, when Yaakov was left alone and he fought against the angel, so it says that he crossed over the Ma'avar Yabok. When he fought with this angel, through which he got the name Yisrael, he also crossed over a stream. So here I'm just pointing out Avram Ha'ivri, Avram crossing over the Euphrates, was paving the way for Israel to cross the Red Sea, to cross the Jordan into Israel. And I mean, beforehand, actually, Yaakov to receive the name Yisrael by crossing over the sea. So each one of these we will go back over, but I wanted to give the bigger picture here, because Avram is the path setter here. He's a trailblazer. So he gets the name Ivri, and until the Megillah, until Mordechai is called Mordechai HaYehudi, we were known as Hebrews. The name Jew only came in approximately the 4th century BCE. So for 1700 years or something, we were called Hebrews, based on Abraham's ability to cross over. And like I said, spiritually, he crossed over many things. I'm just mentioning the water here. Hopefully you'll all get the book. One was Avram, and you can read all about it. Okay, so that was the first connection with, well, like I said, it's not even mentioned that it just says that he left the east to go to Israel. But again, that's how he got his name. Now later, we see that one of the things that Avram occupied himself with was digging wells. We see this throughout his life in Eretz Yisrael. Before he got to Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't mention that he dug any wells. But when he came to Israel, he began to dig wells. So on a practical level, this makes sense. You have to have water, especially in those days before the modern miracle of Israel. And when the whole Jewish people came to Israel, Israel was more or less a desert. It's only when the Jewish people came in and settled the land that the land turned green. So his digging wells represents far more than just a practical need for water. It represents that he was digging new insight. And as we've learned and gone over many times, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. Anytime that the Torah mentions water, it's a hint to Torah itself. So his digging the wells of water is he was digging deep into reality, the insight and the new teachings that he wanted to impart to the whole world. After he passes away, so it says that the Philistines came and they stuffed up the wells. So this represents, we'll call it a danger to everything that Avram taught. Now that he's not, I mean, he commanded such respect worldwide. While he was alive, they wouldn't have dared to stuff up his wells. But when he passes away, it's like, okay, he's gone. His ideas are gone. We can stuff up his well because, I mean, practically speaking, everyone needs water. Why would the Philistines like stuff up a well of water that they could have used? So obviously it has more than just practical meaning here. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. So they were stuffing up his teachings. And then Yitzchak comes along and he begins to redig the wells. He begins to unstuff the wells. And with the first two wells, he has opposition. There's fighting. And Yitzchak moves on, but he continues to redig these wells. And the third well, which was called Rehovot, it's a city in Israel today, but it means from the word Rachav. Because Yitzchak said he dug this well, and they didn't fight with him over it. So he named it Rehovot. He said, now we can branch out, we can spread out in the land. But again, this is symbolic of Yitzchak is redigging the wells that Avram had dug. And from this, we can learn the importance of Yitzchak. Even though of the three patriarchs, we know the least about Yitzchak. The Torah tells us the least amount. But what we can say is, if there would not have been a Yitzchak, Avram's teachings would have ended with him. In other words, his role was critical. And again, it was all with these wells of water, because that represented the new teachings of Avram in the world. And Yitzchak is now making sure that they are established. And from Yitzchak, of course, comes Yaakov, the 12 tribes, and all of Am Yisrael. So he is the crucial link in the chain here. And again, it has to do with water, because so much of what we know about Yitzchak is connected to these wells. Now, one of the things that we see about these whole events around the wells is that Yitzchak does two things. He both redigs the wells that Avram had dug, and he digs new wells. And this becomes very, very symbolic to each and every person, that there's a certain place where we want to carry on the tradition of our forefathers, our foremothers, literally our foremothers. But also, everyone wants to make their own mark. So it's very interesting in the Amidah, the cardinal prayer of Judaism, we say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. And we're told throughout all Jewish tradition, the Torah doesn't waste words, and the sages didn't waste words. It could have said just as easy, the father of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Why does it have to say the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov? So we learn from this a very important thing. Even though we want to carry on tradition, but we have to do it in our own way. In other words, it wasn't good enough for Yitzchak only to redig the wells of Avram. He also had to dig his own wells. And that's true for all of us. This is like, it's connected with the water, where the water becomes the symbol of insight, individualism, and all that goes with it. So Yitzhak did both. He preserved the teachings of Avram. He made sure that they stayed in the world and were strong. And at the same time, he dug his own wells. So this is a very beautiful teaching for all of us with the metaphor of water. Now, we actually would go back, try to do this in somewhat of a chronological order, but not exactly. When the three angels come to visit Avram, of course, he doesn't know that they're angels in the beginning, and he interrupts a incredible vision that he's having of God. God is visiting him, and his presence is palpable. And then he sees these three strangers, and he says, Hashem, I hope you don't mind, but I have to take care of these strangers. So actually, they learn from this that taking care of strangers is as important as greeting the presence of God, the Shekhinah. Anyways, they come, and he says to them, rest under this tree. There's a whole thing to understand about that. But then he says, take a little water. Later, he according to tradition, he slaughtered 3 cows so he could have 3 tongues to give to them. And so I remember Reb Shlomo said, Avram, who it was famous for putting out these incredible feasts and spreads and feeding everyone, why does he say, I'll bring you a little water? So Reb Shlomo said an amazing thing. Based on what we've been learning over and over again, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. If the Torah mentions water, it's a hint of Torah itself. So he said what Avram was teaching all of us is that Torah is so strong that even if you hold on to a little of it, it has enough power to pull you through. To pull you through. That sometimes even just a little water can save your life, spiritually, sometimes even physically. By being connected to Torah, even people who are very far away, but they find a little water, a little something in Yiddishkeit to connect to, that has the power to save. That was a beautiful, beautiful insight by Reb Shlomo. The next idea we have, and this is going to repeat itself a number of times, that Eliezer finds a wife for Yitzchak, Rivka, at a well. Yaakov finds Rachel at a well. Moshe finds Tzipporah at a well. We see this repeat 3 different times. So obviously there's a deep connection. We could say at a very practical level that Israel and this whole Middle East is not like full of water. Not that there isn't streams and rivers and lakes, but it's usually the exception. So as far as society went, where was the meeting place? At the well. People had to have water to live. And if you didn't live near a water source, which most people in the Middle East don't, then you have to go to the well to get your water. So you could say, that's why Rivka was found for Yitzchak at a well, Rachel was found for Yaakov, and Tzipporah was found for Moshe. And there's some truth to that. But here, and again, all of these, we're not going deeply into every detail of these stories, because each story is like a whole Torah in itself. But here, Eliezer, Avram sends Eliezer back to his family to find a wife for Yitzchak, because he didn't want him to marry any of the Canaanite nations. So Eliezer goes, but he doesn't really have a plan. Avram didn't say, you'll do it this way, you'll do this. This is how you'll know where you. He's on his own. He gets to the place where he believes Avram's family is living nearby, and he does something very unusual. He asks God, like he sets up like this test. Like, if whoever comes and says to me, can I give you some water? And I'll water your camels as well. That will be the wife for Yitzhak. This is a very unusual kind of a test here. Like, how did he know how this was going to turn out? So there are many, many layers here. The story has many, many layers. But here we just want to deal with the water here. And so many of the commentaries mostly say the same thing one way or another, that the test being set up was water is Torah. Water represents spirituality, purity, rebirth, newness, just everything good, growth. And so Eliezer just intuitively felt that if this was going to be a right person for Yitzchak, there has to be a connection to water, because Yitzchak was so connected to water, and Avram is so connected to water. So this idea, and so Rivka goes down and draws the water. She draws up the water, that she has the power to draw up the Torah, draw up the water, and she has the qualities. And especially when we look at the Sfirot, so the right side of the Sfirot is called the side of Chesed, the side of water. And so the test that Eliezer set up was, is her kindness going to come through water? That was the whole thing. He could have thought of 100 different tests, but it was like, if someone's going to offer me, I'm a stranger. And she didn't come and say, I'm selling water, $2 a gallon or a liter, and I'm happy to bring it to you. No, she came and she offered water, and Eliezer came with 10 camels. So the Midrash points out, do you have any idea how much a camel drinks? a camel drinks enormous amounts of water. And here she's offering, she didn't ask for any compensation. That's the person for Yitzchak. So it has to do, water has to do with chesed. It was the chesed, but the chesed is intrinsically connected to water. It's the whole right side of the sphirot. Okay, so the next one is when Yaakov meets Rachel. So here, this is a very, very important part of this, this is after his dream of the ladder, where he sees angels going up and down the ladder. God appears to him at the top of the ladder and promises to take care of him, and in a sense his father already had conferred upon him the mantle of being the third patriarch. When he has the dream, he already understands, but he had a lot of things to work out, and the dream, for those who have my book, The Mystical Meaning of Dreams, half of the book is on this dream. What every element of the dream represented, and on a personal level, what was Yaakov learning from this dream? What did he need to learn from this dream? And so he has this dream, and he wakes up, and he then he anoints this rock where he had laid his head with oil, and he says, this is the house of God. And then it says that he picked up his feet and he went towards the east. And then it says, and he saw a well in the field. He saw a well in the field, and there were 3 flocks like camped around the well, and a huge stone on the well. And then he goes and he says, who are you? Do you know my family? Yes. And then Rachel comes, and he sees Rachel, and I missed a part. He asked, why don't you take the stone off the well? There are all these sheep that are waiting to be watered. And they said, well, the stone is so huge, we have to wait till all the shepherds come, and then we pick it up together. So here, Rachel comes, he sees Rachel, he is inspired, and he lifts up the stone by himself. Okay, this is the simple understanding of the story. But like everything in the Torah, there's layer after layer after layer after layer of what all of this represents. Why does the Torah have to tell us all of these details? He could have just said he saw a well, he meets Rachel, and that's it. It had all these little details. So there's a lot of commentary. There's a lot of commentary about this. So the first thing, I'm just taking a compilation of different insights that different people give. So first of all, the idea that he sees a well in the field. Again, this is coming off of his dream. And it says he picked up his feet and he went to the, in other words, he went with tremendous enthusiasm. The dream inspired him. It strengthened him. I mean, how could it not? God comes and says, I will be with you. I will take care of you. I will make sure that everything you are destined to accomplish will be accomplished. Like what else could you want? And he recognizes that God was, in fact, he says, God was in this place and I didn't know. When he lay down to sleep, he didn't realize God was in the place. But then when God appeared, then he called it, this is the house of God. So many people say that this inspiration led him to this well in the field. The field represents the soul coming down into the body, and the field is like malchut, is like the reality that we live in. The soul coming into the body, and how do we navigate this world? So we navigate it with the Torah, and the Torah is represented by water. So coming off this dream, he sees a well in the field. Like, in other words, this is my way forward. God is showing me already the way forward by revealing this water in the field. The big stone on the well represents the Yetzer Hara, the other side, Satan, whatever we want to call it, the Samach Mem. In other words, here's this water. It is Ushavtem Mayim Bisasom Mimayinei Yeshua. These are the waters of joy and salvation. But there's this big stone over them. How do you get to them? So this represents all the challenges that Yaakov is going to go through, not just Yaakov. Yaakov is us. And so even if we have the Torah, even if we have the well in the field, we still have to contend with the Yetzer Hara. No way around it. No way around it. So then, and much of what I'm saying now comes from the Slonim Rebbe in the Tivat Shalom. So he says like this, he gives three different symbolisms of what this well represents, and the three flocks surrounding the well. So the first thing he says, this represents Shabbat. This represents Shabbat. Shabbat is our well in the field. It's what keeps us alive through, just like here, the field is kind of like the 40 years in the desert. To the symbolic of our life in this world. So the field is our life in this world, and what waters us, what gives us sustenance, which gets us through week by week, is Shabbat. And the three flocks are the three meals of Shabbat. Again, that's his symbolic understanding of this well in the field. The well in the field is very, very symbolic. Then he says this is representative of tefillah. What keeps us connected and gives us hope is prayer. especially at this time of year, Tishrei. So much time is spent praying, but it gives us such koach, gives us such inspiration and hope. So the Slonim Rebbe says that the well in the field, this is prayer. And what are the 3 flocks? Our 3 daily prayers. He goes in much more detail, but I'm just giving the short version here. And the last one he says is the Torah itself. Ein mayim ela Torah. The Torah is the well in the field. That's what waters us. That's what makes us grow. And then he brings the midrash. What's the connection with 3 flocks? So he brings the midrash that on the 3rd month, after 3 days of preparation, the 3rd of a triplet, meaning Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, to a 3 leveled people, Kohen, Levi, Israel, who would receive a 3-part Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So that is the secret of being Am Segula, a special people, because Segula also means that's the vowel Segol is a triangle, 3 dots, Segol, Segula. So this idea of the Torah has to do with all of these 3s. It was given in the 3rd month after 3 days of preparation through a triplets, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, to a 3-leveled people and a 3-leveled Torah. So again, that's all from the Slonim. This well in the field is Shabbat, Tefillah, and Torah itself. The big stone is, even if we're given all these things, we still have to take off the Yetzer Hara. We still have to take off all of the powers of this world working to prevent us from connecting deeply to Shabbat and to Torah and to Tefillah. And so the last thing that I want to mention is, it says in the Gemara, Eza Isha Kshera, who is a kosher woman? Give me a second. Ha'oseh Ratzon Ba'ala, who does the will of her husband. Now, when most people hear that today, it's like, what? Because it sounds like a kosher woman is someone who simply listens to her husband and does what her husband tells her. That is not what is meant here. We've discussed this many times. The word oseh, la'asot, to do, means to fix. So this I learned from Rav Ginsburg. So who is a kosher woman? A woman who fixes her husband's will. Or we could say in modern terms, behind every great man is a great woman. Today, that doesn't work anymore because you probably have as many senators and congresswomen and, as you do men. So it's like the vice president of the United States has a best man behind the vice president, whatever. But I'm bringing this up, and actually Rav Ginsburg says another beautiful thing. It says, if you read it, Eza, excuse me, Eza Isha Kshera. You could also read it Kshera if you just change the shin to a sin. Eza Isha Kisara. Who is a woman like Sarah? one who fixes her husband's ratzon. And this we see in the story of when Sarah says, we have to send Hagar and Ishmael away, and Avram was not happy with this. And God had to come and say, everything that Sarah says, listen to her voice. In other words, she knows better than you in this instance. So I'm mentioning all of this because of the last part of the story is after the shepherds say we can't take this big stone off, then here comes Rachel, and Yaakov sees Rachel, and then he goes and he picks up the stone by himself. So this is a beautiful manifestation of Rachel fixing Yaakov's ratzon. As in other words, all of a sudden he had the strength, the ratzon, to pick up this stone by himself. But it was only inspired by Rachel. So that's just a beautiful ending of this story. So just to summarize, here we've seen with, and we're not done with Yaakov yet, but we've seen with Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and with Rivka and Rachel, it all has to do with these wells of water. It's all connected to the water. So that was our common theme tonight. And we will be continuing going through other incidences in the Torah that have to do with water. Since this is the last time we're meeting before Yom Kippur, I want to bless everyone with a Gemar Chatima Tova, that everyone should be sealed in the book of life. And this Yom Kippur, we should remember the purifying waters and to envision them and to feel them and to integrate them. And we should all be atoned for, forgiven, and purified.